Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to use oil sticks, and if you would like a real-time version of this tutorial, you can find it up now in Critique Club. And if you'd like a just how to use oil stick overview video, let me know in the comments below because I can film one of those for you too. I'm going to start off with the inspiration of this piece, which was actually a piece of deli paper. I had gone out to dinner with my husband at a restaurant that my daughter Lila was working at, and he ordered fish and chips. It was like an Irish pub restaurant, and it came in on the coolest deli paper. And so I asked my daughter if I could snag a sheet of that for artwork, and she just brought me a page. So I decided I would decoupage that onto an 8x8 canvas and use that for the backdrop here. I'm using matte medium as my glue and to kind of seal it down, but then I'm going to go over it with some Liquitex clear gesso. And the reason why I like the Liquitex brand is because it's got a really good grit to it, and I find that Liquitex clear gesso is just so great for almost any surface you want to paint on top of it. You could do pastels, you can do color pencil, you could do both oil and soft pastels. You can even do watercolor on it a bit. So it's just a wonderful technique, wonderful product. And I'm just making sure I get all of the bits just sealed down because it is a deli paper, which is kind of like a dry waxed paper. So I got to make sure that I get it sealed down really well so there's no bubbles. And then I got to make sure I go over it with the clear gesso so that I get that tooth back. Otherwise, I'm going to be painting on this kind of slick surface, which is going to really limit how much material I can put down. But one of the things I love about this is seeing that kind of that newsprinty look, and I don't want to cover that all up 100%. So I want to make sure that it's sealed down well enough and protected as well that if I don't put paint over it, I've still got a nice seal there. So this is just some paper I was testing out my oil sticks on. Now these oil sticks, the Winsor Newton oil bars, are like 25 years old. They are seriously probably older than you would want to hold on to art supplies to use them, but I have to report they all were in great condition. So what I did to these old oil sticks is I used an X-Acto knife and I trimmed off the hard outer shell because oil sticks will just oxidize on the outer layer. So when you go to use it again, then you just need to wipe off that outer layer. I used a compass to draw my plate. Obviously you could trace the plate if you wanted to. And then I just kind of scribbled some burnt sienna oil stick in the background. And now I'm using a paintbrush with some odorless mineral spirits to thin that down a bit. Basically, I just want to stain this background. I want to just tone it a bit because I want to keep that newsprint look. I think this is a really fun way to incorporate collage along with any sort of other type of painting you want to do. If you don't have oil sticks, you could do this with oil pastel. The only difference with oil pastel is that you're going to need to protect it somehow. So if you're doing this with oil pastel, you might want to use it on like a canvas panel or a flat board and then matte it and frame it under glass. Or I do have a video on how I work with oil pastels and I varnish them. So if you want more information on that, you can check out that video. I'll try to remember to link it down below. But if I don't, just check out my channel. Just Google how to varnish an oil pastel and it should come up. But I've developed a method that works pretty good for me. And I've had a couple paintings hanging in my kitchen for like the last 6 months and actually probably longer, more like 8 months, and no issues whatsoever. It's a really wonderful technique. So because oil paint sticks can be expensive, much more expensive than oil pastels, and yeah, sometimes you just want to experiment with something that's a little bit cheaper. So I found this reference photo on Unsplash, and I know fish and chips generally are like a battered fish, but I thought this would be a little bit more visually interesting to actually have a fish. But then I needed also like a lemon wedge and some French fries. So I just kind of basically bounced around on a couple different reference photos. I guess I could have put some tartar sauce in there. That would have been a good idea. Oh well, I still could, I suppose. But I just wanted to also keep it simple enough that I could see some of that writing in the background and just kind of strike the balance. And plus, I'm getting used to this supply. Like I said, I've had those oil sticks for 25 years and barely used them. And I think it's because they were precious and I was worried I was going to use them up. But the thing I realized is you don't use much paint with these and you don't waste much paint, which is really good because I was worried, well, they seal over, then you got to wipe off the seal. And I think about all that waste, but you know, there's hardly any waste on the palette when I'm done. And there's hardly any, the brushes are easy to clean because there isn't a ton of pigment in the brushes when I'm done. So it's really, I think, quite a, what do I want to say, zero waste type of product. What I'm using for the palette there is the cardboard that came on the corner of my canvas. This is just an inexpensive Royal and Langnickel canvas that I'm using, and it was wrapped in like a cellophane, and it had this little cardboard wrapper, which I'm just using the back side as a palette, which brings me to another point here. This time of year, if you live in the United States, you get all of those like political mailers. They're usually like postcards or like a thick, sometimes they're like 11 by 8.5 inch large, glossy cardstock material. You can use that for a palette. I mean, it might be a little confusing to mix on there where you see the other colors, but it makes a great palette surface or surface to start paint pens on, or just stuff to protect your table. It's really, those are great for this sort of purpose. And if they're going to keep sending you all of those political mailers, then, you know, you might as well get some use out of it in the studio, and then you don't feel bad throwing them away, because generally printed glossy material like that, even if you do live in a town that recycles, they can't recycle that material. So gotta love that. Gotta love free art supplies in the mail, right? And I really like this set of oil sticks from Winsor Newton because they're great for mixing. It came with a burnt sienna and a burnt umber, but I'm using the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to make my darker black in this painting. So that worked out really well. I find that the Winsor Newton oil bars are a lot more dense versus the new Sennelier oil sticks that I picked up at Blick. If you saw my intentional art haul, you would have seen that set of 6 little oil sticks. And those are by Sennelier. They're like $22 and something a piece at Blick. So they're quite affordable as far as oil sticks go. They're about a half stick size, I think. The oil bars I have from Winsor & Newton are what they call their Slims line. So I think they had really chunky ones. These are smaller ones. I don't know what the equivalent in tube paint would be. I'm thinking probably, I don't know, maybe like a smaller to standard size oil paint tube. But I was able to paint this whole painting. It didn't take a lot. Now, granted, I wasn't using really thick bits of color, but this is really encouraging for me because I was kind of afraid to use them because I'm like, well, what if I love them and I can't get them anymore? I'm going to use them up. But I think they're pretty slow wearing. So this might be a really good option for folks that want to do oil painting, but they don't want the mess and they don't want the smell and they don't want all of the supplies and the big cleanup. Now you do have to clean it up with mineral spirits or turpentine or some sort of solvent, and then a soap and water wash afterwards. But these were so much easier to clean than after using typical oil paints. And these are compatible with other oil paints. So if you want to block in with the oil sticks and then use oil paints over top, you can do that absolutely. Or maybe you don't have the color you need in oil stick, but you do in an oil paint tube. You can mix them together. So oil paint sticks are essentially oil paint. They're pigment, a drying oil like linseed oil, and enough wax to help it hold its shape. Whereas oil pastels are pigment, wax, and a non-drying oil, which would be like a mineral oil. And so the reason why you can use oil pastels on any sort of paper and not worry about it, but you can't do that with the oil sticks because the oil sticks will eventually rot the paper, has to do with the oil. The reason why the oil sticks dry is that they have that drying oil which oxidizes as it's exposed to air, whereas the non-drying oil in an oil pastel doesn't oxidize, it doesn't change, it will always remain a little bit tacky. So that's why if you are going to paint with them, the best practice is to mat it and put it under glass. But if you want to varnish it, you've got to do something to seal that in. And what I do is sometimes I'll use like the Sennelier oil pastel fixative, but often what I found actually works really well is just I'll usually spray a thin coating of the Sennelier fixative, let that dry, and then I use a Minwax polyacrylic varnish. It's just like a really thin acrylic varnish, and that seems to seal everything in, and it doesn't crack for whatever reason. That's been what I've done. You can even use like a gloss medium as an isolation coat if you think you might want to remove a varnish later, but I think it works quite well. I also feel though that with the oil paint sticks, I can get a little bit more detail than I can with the oil pastels, maybe because that's probably because I'm really thinning it down in places and using a brush. But Yeah, I don't know. I'm just really thrilled with this, rediscovering this product and playing with them. And I really want to do some more work with this. So if you're interested, let me know and I'll film it if I do. One thing that's kind of tricky is that oil, anytime you're working with like an oil paint medium, is that you will get some glare. So having a board like I have here, which is just like a tabletop easel, really is helpful because I can tip it at different angles so I'm not seeing the glare, and then I can lay it down flat so I can film. Ultimately, I would be using an easel, like just using my regular easel, but when I want to record something, I need to have it set up where my camera can easily photograph it. So this is a really good, I would say it's a really good compromise. If you don't have one of these easels, you can just find stuff around your house. You could take some books and wrap them in newsprint if you don't want to get them dirty, and you can just stack those up and use, rest your canvas board or your stretch canvas on the edge of the book so you can alter that a little bit. You can get different heights. I'd also say that probably a better surface for these oil sticks would be a firm surface rather than a stretch canvas, which obviously it works fine. But I think that, especially if you're going to put a thicker coat of paint, I would recommend a cradled wood board or a canvas panel just so that you have a little bit of resistance behind it. But the stretch canvas worked fine. It's just, something to think about. And I am using a brush a lot, like scribbling the stick onto that little piece of cardstock and picking it up and painting with that. So there's so many ways you can use it. I think it's so versatile. Now you may be thinking, what's the point of using oil sticks if you're just going to pick it up with a brush? Just because I have them out, honestly, oil paint's going to work just as easily. One benefit, though, to the oil sticks is I'll say they were dry to the touch the next day, which even when I use thin applications of oil paint, I don't find that to be the case. So that was really nice, having that dry, and I could work right over it the next day. So even if you wanted to just get oil sticks for your first layer or two of paint, that would be a good option. So while I'm using oil sticks or oil paint, my first layer I'm going to add a solvent to. So in my case, Gamsol. I have that in that little cup there on my palette, and that's going to make the paint dry quicker. So there's a thing in oil painting called the fat over lean rule, and basically what that means is you want to put your quicker, drier, or leaner layers down first, and then you want progressively fatter layers on top. So when you add linseed oil or any sort of oil to your paint, it's going to slow down the drying time. So you don't want to put really thick, oily layers on the bottom and then put thin down layers on top, because that bottom layer is still oxidizing, it's still releasing gases, it's still shifting, and that's when you end up with a crackle on your surface. So you usually don't want that to happen, because that's not archival. If you want to do a special effect, well, that's up to you, but it's going to cause probably your outer layers to flake off eventually. So it's just not the best idea. So with this, it's great because the oil sticks can be very lean when you use them to sketch, and then you thin down with a thinner, and then you've got that first layer dry to the touch, and then you could go over with your traditional oils if you want to. So I just think this is just a wonderful, wonderful medium. And for someone who loves sketching, who loves drawing, who loves that kind of tactile, visceral, holding a stick of pigment in their hands like me, it's just ideal. Now, of course, you want to be aware of what is in your oil sticks. The ones I have from Winsor & Newton did contain a couple of cadmium colors, and they had a label on them saying "Do not spray apply." So it's just kind of good to be aware of that anytime you're going to be trying out a new supply, especially if you get a vintage supply. Because Winsor & Newton was not always great about putting pigment information on their products, so you really need to be aware of what you're working with. And sometimes it's they just assume that you would know rather than it being printed right out there. I like that you could dry brush with dry brush. You can kind of scumble, I guess would be a better term, over the canvas, and I can get that cool kind of glistening texture by just scumbling that white stick over the fish. I really loved how that looked, and I wanted to leave as much of that as possible, but also I was going in with some more painted on oil stick. You can see how I did that there. It's just so fun. I really like it. I don't know if I'm overworking at this point, because when I watch it back, this took about 2 hours to paint. When I watch it back, and that's including the time to prep the canvas too, I say, "Oh, wait, I like that. Why did I go over that?" But you just got to trust that it's going to turn out okay in the end. And one viewer on Instagram said that my French fries, or chips, if you will, look like macaroni noodles. And I have to say, they kind of do. I think I needed a little bit more crispness to them, but I didn't really like the French fry reference that I had, so I was kind of just going off memory of steak fries, but I think I should have made them longer. But anyway, overall, I'm really happy with the way it came out, so I'm not gonna be bothered by that. And maybe I'll do some other sort of dinery dinner and try to get my hands on some more printed deli paper. I don't want to buy like a whole pack of it because it comes in like 1,000 sheets. So what I would like to do is get like an assortment of different deli papers. I think what I have to do is just go out to eat somewhere and order a basket, or go to eat with somebody that's getting something like that and just ask if I can have a extra piece, or if I can buy a couple sheets of deli paper from them, so I have a variety of different papers to go by, because it really is it decoupaged really well. I didn't know if it might wrinkle because it's got that waxy surface, but it worked really well. And come to think of it, I have all kinds of just plain white deli paper that I use for gel printing, and I bet I could use StazOn ink and just stamp some random text stamps that I have and make my own perfect deli paper that I can use in collage. And I'll probably end up doing that, honestly, because then I'll have something totally unique, and I won't have to go out and hunt for anything. I'll just already have it. And that's what I like about having stock supplies in my studio, especially if they're things that aren't going to go bad, because you can always, even if some new trend comes out or some new supply comes out, or you have some other idea, you can usually substitute or use the supplies you already have if you have a good variety of stock supplies to make whatever the greatest and latest trend or technique or thing you want to try is. When you have an idea, you can execute it because you have the raw materials that you need. In fact, one of the experiments I want to try within the next couple of days is I want to try to make my own oil sticks. I have a lot of oil pastels. I have a lot of oil paint. I have some wax. I have linseed oil. I think I'm going to try melting down an oil pastel and adding some oil paint to it and seeing how that dries up. And then seeing what I would need to add in the form of linseed oil and wax to get it to the firmness that I want. But honestly, that might work just fine, because when I use an oil stick, it's like a firm oil paint. It doesn't feel like it has that much wax in it. So I'm thinking that the wax that's in an oil pastel, because I have so many oil pastels that I'd love to use up, because I just invested in some Caran d'Ache Neo pastels, so I need to use up some of my old ones to justify this purchase. But I did buy some open stock to make sure that I like them. Last winter I bought some open stock ones. I'm like, I'm gonna make sure I really like these before I go investing. And then I've been like watching prices like a hawk, and today I found like a really awesome price. I'm like, all right, sold. I did post about that price too on my YouTube community tab, in case anybody wants to be enabled. They can find it for themselves. But yeah, it's always a good idea when it's a pricey supply to buy a couple open stock or a small sampler to see if you really like them before you go and buy, even though, yeah, you'd be spending a little bit more overall if you end up buying like a full set of something. But the colors you tend to select open stock tend to be the ones that we'd use up earlier anyway. So I don't think it's that big of a deal. Plus, for me, I don't know if you're like this, but for me, if I have a lot of something, I don't feel precious about using it. When I have just a few of something, then I get really dear about them, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to waste it, but save it. But you don't get good at anything by saving your supplies. You're not going to get good at art by saving your favorite paints or the best paints until you're good. You've got to use the paints to get good at using the paints, And if you're always using kind of subpar materials and you never let yourself try the better stuff, you won't know if it's the materials or you that's holding you back. And I'm a big fan of like finding good quality budget supplies to learn on. Absolutely. I love Paul Rubens supplies because they are that perfect balance between quality and affordability. I feel like they're like 90% as good as any of the legacy brands you're going to use. But then eventually you do kind of want to find your favorites, because by the time that you've gotten to the point where you've used up those kind of student tier supplies, you're not going to be wasting so much. When you put brush to paper, you're going to be creating something that you could predict the results. And you're going to be experimenting too, because you need to experiment to grow, but you will be you'll be having less failures. And when you do have a failure, it's not that big of a deal. You're not wasting that many supplies. But when you're a beginner, you go through a lot. And you can be kind of terrified at wasting these expensive supplies. So finding that nice balance, I think, is really good. And I don't know, I love to, play with some cheap supplies just because I know I don't have to worry about it. And I can be really experimental. But anyway, I guess there's a pot for every lid, right? There's a supply for everyone. And I love how this is coming out. I did add a smidgen of white oil paint from a tube, and I added a little bit of blue, of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, so I could get a really nice flowy dark, because the oil bars are a little stiff, maybe because of their age or maybe the formulation, I'm not sure. And I found that when I wanted to do those final details with a brush, they were just too stiff. So I did get a little bit of paint out of my tubes, and they worked beautifully together. There was no issue there, and plus putting those thicker layers, the fatter layers on at the end is perfect. It'll dry slower. It's not going to cause an adhesion problem or an archivability problem, and again, you get the best of both worlds. Now, one thing that I thought about doing before I glued down the deli paper at the beginning was I thought about crinkling it up and then spreading it out and gluing it down to have a little extra texture and wrinkles. That's something you absolutely could do. Thinking about this though, there's deli paper that have like checkerboard on them, and how fun would that be to do like a Italian dish and do like a checkerboard deli paper so it would look like an Italian restaurant tablecloth. That would be cool. Or, because deli paper comes in so many different patterns. I'm just going to have to, anytime, I'm just going to tell all my family, just like, if you ever go out to eat someplace and you're ordering fried food, will you ask for an extra sheet of deli paper for me? And I can build up a little stash. And then it won't be overwhelming, so I'll just have a few sheets of it and I can use them as they come into my life. Kind of like how we used to trade napkins, like in the card making world. Here I'm putting a darker drop shadow here because I feel like that gives it a nice lift and almost has like a trompe-l'oeil effect, like a fool the eye effect, like a faux finish effect. Does that make sense? I think that's quite effective there. And again, it's thinned out, and I'm using a filbert brush that's pretty dry to just kind of drag it around and buff it out and blend it out, so I just get kind of like a soft rouge effect. Yeah, I'm liking how this came out, and I just went in and added some white highlights. I did add some more bold streaks on the plate, which you'll see in the final photo here in just a second, but I wanted to think about that before I added that on there. But I'm really happy with how it came out, and if you would like the real-time version of this, you can check it out now in Critique Club at lindsayweirich.teachable.com. Thanks for watching. Please give me a thumbs up before you go. Until next time, happy crafting. Bye!